Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, founder and principal consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in this video, I want to finally build this thing right here. Now, I kind of flip-flopped back and forth on what type of chart would be best to kind of show this information, and we're doing this all in app script with uh, the Google Charts API. Now, we started this endeavor. This is the first time that I've actually really used that Google Charts API. I usually use a different library in order to populate charts, but there's many different ways we can do it. I'm finding that Google Charts API does have limitations. Really, anything that you choose has limitations. You just got to make sure that those limitations don't impact uh, your intended result. I mean, we could continue to do this in Google Apps Script, which we will, but there are other options that you can use, and again, with limitations. So Google has in its inventory something, or that works with it, something called Looker Studio. And what Looker Studio is, here, let me just jump over here and I'll show you. So what Looker Studio is this is that same exact chart that we have. And it is a simple data visualization. Not very simple, but it's essentially Google's response to things like Microsoft BI or something like that. So very little code, but with very little code means that we don't have um, necessarily the functionality that we would have if we coded it directly in Google Apps Script. Some of the data that we have, like the filtering here with um, gender, age, and then populating each and every single data point here, you would still need to code. So it's kind of a mute point there. If you are looking for just a very simple way to populate this data, and what we may do is do this with our benefits, because we're not really going to need to do much calculations with our benefits, not like we did with our compensation, but we could do it in Looker Studio and then simply embed it into our web app. Now, one thing that we need to be cognizant of, and I highly suggest you guys are aware of this, is if you choose to go outside of your web app or code for something, then you're basically relying on that thing being up and not changing. Now, everything goes through updates, so the more things that you pull from the outside of your code in, you have to be aware of when they update and how that update impacts your functionality here. So let's jump back over here and let me show you how I created this. This is the standalone version, so I'll jump over to our full PCM and show you how it is that I created this bar chart here just for our health benefits. Now, anytime that we are doing anything with charts, we need to ensure that we understand how the charts need the data. So since we're doing a bar chart, let's jump over here real quick to this Google Charts documentation. Since we're doing a bar chart needs the data in a certain format. So it obviously needs the same thing, the same data table aspect. So you have the y-axis essentially and the x-axis, and this is the headers followed by the data. Now, how we did that previously with our scatter plot was we used we used our data table. this. So we just created a data table and then we added the columns and the rows because we brought over our data dynamically, if you remember. So it actually looked a lot like this. So we had our data table, we passed the information here, and then what we did was we wrote out all the columns and then did that for each to run through it and populate the fields, and then we essentially created the data that way. Now I want to show a different method because really this is the intent of this isn't to create a fully functional go-to-market PCM. It's to kind of explain what's happening, how to create it, show examples. We will have a product at the end of it, of course, but really the intent is to give a variety of code templates to where you can just grab and change and modify depending on what it is that you need. And instead of doing our bar chart with just a data table, I'm going to try and do it with the ArrayToDataTable. Now, what the ArrayToDataTable is, it's a little bit easier. Simply, you just take this, you pass information to this data table array, or this ArrayToDataTable, and this piece here will actually then populate this for you. And because we have a large amount of data in our benefits section, I'm going to try it this way as opposed to just writing out the data table like we did. That way you'll have both versions. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is look at our bar chart. And ensure that the data we're going to be able to pass matches or is configured in the way that it's going to need to populate. So this is the method that it's expecting. That's fine. I think we got that. So let's jump over here to our main code here, our analytics code, because especially with benefit data, you should try and have all calculations, a majority of the information processing handled on the server side, outside of view from the customer or the client facing. Now, of course, there's got to be some sort of movement on the client side, but for the most part, we just want to grab and then populate. We don't want to really do much in that client side because it's benefits data. So in order to do that, we are going to need to handle the bulk of our information right here in our app script. So let's create a function. And I'm not going to go too in depth on this because this could be a series. But when we get done with this function and this chart, you will have a good template to where you can just modify the code and be good to go. So we're going to use our extract helper function here. And I already have the array indexes that we need. So let's just create a variable here. And the indexes that we're going to need start at 63. And end at 77. Six, 77. Okay, so this is all the arrays that we're going to want. Guess we should give this a name. Let's call it get benefit data. And now let's take this array and pass it to our extract dynamic column, our helper function. Let's put this into a variable just like we did up here, the selected columns. Let's just call it benefit selected columns. And that is going to equal this helper function, except the parameters are going to be different. So we're going to need our employee full data, but instead of the sal array, it's going to be this bin array. Now let's go ahead and log this out just to see what we got here. Save it. Okay, and here is all of our benefit data. Now remember, it's coming to us in a two-dimensional array, so we're going to have to kind of manage that. Now, what we're going to need to do is our data is going to be a series of counts and averages. So what we need to do is sum up how many employees use ABC Dental as opposed to XYZ Dental, and then do that for a whole bunch of other things, like if they have family coverage or individual coverage. And then we're going to need to take the average employer pay or employee pay and the average employee pay, as well as for the 401k piece. So we're going to need to ensure that our data is returned in a way that is going to be able to be populated on that bar chart. So we're going to have to individually assign and sum and then run a for each on every single line. So let's go ahead and start doing that. Hopefully it'll make sense as I'm typing it out and talking. So let's start by initializing, spell it right, the counts and the sums. So we're going to create a lot of variables here. So we'll call this benefit provider count. And what we're going to do is we are going to create essentially an object to allow our sums to accumulate. So when we come down here, let's find one here. I think it's in Total Rewards JS here. We declared a sum, right? And we had to start that sum at 0. We emptied it out so it can accumulate the information. And we're going to do the same exact thing here for the provider, the benefit provider. So our benefit provider, let's put this into a object here. The first benefit provider we have is ABC. Now, since this is an object, this is going to be essentially a key value pair. And ABC, we are going to start at 0. And then we're going to do the same exact thing for XYZ. 0. And now let's create another one for the coverage count. And that is going to be individual or family. So let's create the key. And then this will be 0. Family will also be a 0. And then let me create the rest just so we don't have to watch me type it up. Okay, so now we have all of our initializing variables. They're all starting at 0. Now you'll see that our plan count, the choice, the fee for services, HMO, EPO, those are all there. And each one of these correlates to the provider, the coverage, and the plan. Now, instead of doing the count, what we're going to need to do is grab those numerical values and set them to 0 so we can or set the variable to 0 so we can start accumulating it. And then we created a variable called row count. And what that's going to be equal to is just how long this is. Because what we're going to do is we are going to need to run through this and ensure that we don't just go on forever, because we're going to need to actually stop once it gets to the end of our data. So that's what that row count is. So now what we can do is start processing our data. Let's create a comment here. Process the data for chart placements, something like that. And what we're going to do is we are going to run a for each, and we're going to run a for each on this bin selected columns. And this for each is going to have quite a bit of if statements within it. And what we're going to need these if statements to do. Okay, there we go. And there we go. Nope. There we go. And that. There we go. So what we're going to need these if statements to eventually do is to check the provider. If the provider is strictly equal to, say, ABC, then we're going to need to count this and then start accumulating it. And if the benefit provider or the provider is XYZ, then we're going to need to do the same thing. So we're going to have quite a few if statements. But in order to do that, what we need to do is assign the provider, the coverage, and the plan. So we need to assign these a data from our benefit select items. So first, let's create some variables. We'll call this provider, and this provider is going to equal the row at 0. And the row 0 is the index that we received when we logged this out. So even though it is at index 63, when this returns, it's going to be the first element. So 0. And then we can do one for coverage. And that is going to be equal to row 2 I believe, let's see, 65. Let's just make sure that we're on here. Oh, yep, coverage 2, so the plan is 1. Okay, got ahead of myself. Let plan equals row 1. And we also need the employee cost and the employer cost. Employee cost. Now, when we think about how our data is going to be passed, when we think about how our data is going to be passed from our spreadsheet, in order to make our records retrieval function work, we set everything to plain text. And that was because Google Sheets has the way of formatting things under this automatic thing. It tries to just guess which it is, and it really does. Sometimes it works great and gets it right, but other times it really misses the mark. And JavaScript and even Google Apps Script don't understand in automatic formatting. It's either a number, plain text, or Boolean or NaN or something like that. So when we think about employee cost, to save ourselves trouble down the line, let's just format it into a number right off the bat. So we can do that by using this number. And that number is going to be equal to the row. Since this is the employee, it's going to be the next one over from this coverage. So that will set that into a number. And if it's not, what we can do is let's just check to where if it's empty or whatever, we'll just give it an OR statement and we'll just say it's OR 0. Now let's do the same thing to the employer cost. The employer cost is also going to be a number at row 4 or simply 0. All right, now what we can start doing is counting the providers, counting the average, counting the plan, and then summing up these two. So let's count provider. And what we're going to do is we are going to simply run a if statement, but I'm not going to write an if statement like this. And then, I'm not going to write it like this. I'm going to use shorthand because we're going to have a lot of data here and I don't want it to get cluttered. So a way that you can write an if statement in shorthand, if you're not doing anything else, if else is just completely blank and you're only checking one thing, if it's there, you're counting it. So a way we can write that is if provider, which is this up here, if I can spell it right, there we go, is strictly equal to ABC space benefit provider count, which is this up here, we want to increment for ABC. Just like that. So what it's going to do is it's going to check if the provider is ABC. And if it is ABC, it's going to come up here to this benefit provider count, grab ABC, and put 1 there. And then it's going to go do it again. So it's going to do it over and over and over for every single line because it's in this for each. And then we can do the same exact thing for XYZ. Benefit provider count at XYZ increment. So now we have the count providers done. So I'm going to fill out the rest of these until we get up to the sum, just so you're not having to watch me type, because I know that's just loads of fun. So give me a second and I'll type these up. Okay, so I got all the counts done. We don't need capital letters there. Got all the counts done. And what it's going to do in this for each is it's going to go line by line. And it's going to count if the provider equals ABC, then it's going to go up here to our object using this key and increasing that by, 1. And if not, it's not going to do anything. Same with XYZ, same with individual, same with family. Now the exclusive provider org, these are just essentially random options. May or may not look like this in your company, but these are just placeholders. These can be changed however it is you need to be. But the point I'm trying to make is this must be exactly identical to how it shows up in the spreadsheet. Because if you just type in FFS for fee for service and you don't have just FFS, yes, then it's not going to count it and you're going to have a 0 there. So these must be identical. And if you have a space in these, then these must be in quotation marks as a string. Just word of caution. So now we have the count. So let's do the averages now. Or not the average yet. We're going to have to get the sum first and then the average. And let's sum them up here. We'll just say sum costs, and we are going to take the total employee cost, which is this one right here, and we are going to sum, remember this little indicator right here. We are going to plus equal the employee cost. And then we're going to do the same, we're going to do the same exact thing to the employer cost. That's equal. So what these two lines are going to do is these are simply going to sum up for every single row the employee cost and the employer cost, and then add it to this variable here, or this variable, excuse me. Just going to incrementally increase it. So then we can average that. So we can come up here and now calculate our averages outside of our for each, because our for each should be done now. We don't want to run the average every single time in the for each. So we want to get out of that for each loop, and we'll calculate averages down here. And what we're going to do is we are going to set a variable, because we're going to need to reference this. We'll call this average employee cost, and that is going to be equal to the total employee cost divided by our row count. Now we could simply pass it down here to our calculate average for our values. But this way you will have a single line to calculate an average if we're doing it this way, or simply 0. Now this 0 is going to be a great debugger. If something's not working correctly, we can go into our console log and it'll say 0 instead of like nan or whatever. We'll know exactly what's going on if something's not working. So this is going to be average employee. Not employee, employer. And that is going to be equal to total employer cost divided by row count, or 0. Okay, good. So now we got our averages and they're stored. So now what we can do is start preparing this data for the chart. And since we're doing it here on our server side, all we will need to do is run that ArrayToDataTable helper function in our chart code, and it will just, it'll populate it for us to where we don't need to add the column and then add the row. So we need to create an array of data, because we're using ArrayToDataTable, so it's got to be in an array. And let's just call this benefits data. And this is going to be equal to our category. Because remember, we're building, instead of building the table on that side, we're going to build it on this side. And since we're doing both counts and costs, the other axis is going to be count or cost. So now what we can start doing is populating our data. And the first one is going to be ABC. I should really spell that right. And what ABC is going to be, this counter cost, what we need to populate here is the total count of that. And the total count, if you think about where we're at, it's going to be this object, that key, and then whatever value we ended up with. So it's going to look like this: benefit provider count. Yep, that's it. And we simply want to grab the ABC one. And then we can do the same exact thing for XYZ. It's going to be benefit provider count dot XYZ. So I'm going to type out the rest of these so you don't have to watch, and then you'll see what actually happens and occurs. Okay, so now this should do it. I just typed out the rest of these. Now this, in our data, this is spelled out. So essentially that's going to be spelled out there. And you'll notice that on our average, I put 2 fixed at 2. So that's going to give us 2 decimal places, or should anyway. But now what we've created is our data table. And when you look at kind of imagining what this is a number, this is a number, 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 number. When we come over here to our bar chart, we're not really doing anything with the style. But when you come over here to the bar chart, that's the way it wants this data. The category, or in this case, that element, we called it category, and then that value. You know, the value is density in this case, and then that's a number. Well, we have ours as whatever the benefit thing is, and then either the count or the average. So essentially, we just created this. So now instead of having to type this out to where everybody can see that data, we can simply just pass this to that array data table. But the first thing we need to do, it's not going to work yet because we haven't returned anything. So what we're wanting to return is this benefits data. And now that should take care of, let's get rid of this logger here. That should take care of our data side. Uh-oh, line 70. Oops. Okay, good. So that should take care of our data on our app script side. So now let's go over here to our total rewards page. And you'll see that this is a repeat here. And I'm just going to get this functional. And then since we already called this, we don't need to call this, but we can jump in here and then set this Google Charts set on callback thing to run and then populate both charts. So there's a lot of redundancy that we're going to get, but really we just want to get this thing functional first. And you'll see that the onload callback is calling this. So let's create this function here real quick. It's going to be load benefits data. And this is going to essentially grab the data from our Google Apps script side. So we're going to need this Google script run, and it's going to return data. So we want to have this success handler. And after it gets the data, we're going to want to draw the benefits visualization, is what we called it. We're keeping the same naming convention as we did in our scatter plot. So this one would simply be draw benefits visualization. So we will have to create this function. And the function that we want to call on our Google Apps script side is get benefit data. And we're not passing anything to it. We just need the data back. And then that should take care of our load benefits data. Now we can start creating this draw benefits visualization function. And this is going to receive whatever is coming back from our Google Apps script side. And we need to refer to that some way. We need to give it some sort of reference name. And we'll call this benefits data. And we'll create a constant here because we're going to need to essentially run the visualization and the ArrayToDataTable. So if you come back over here, we're going to essentially need to do that. And let's name our variable, we'll call it formatted data, because honestly, that's what it is. And it's going to be Google visualization, and we want to do an array to data table. And this array to data table is going to take this benefits data. So that takes care of our data. So now what we're going to need to do is our options. And we'll call this benefits options. So the first thing, let's give it a title. And let's call this title health benefits overview. And let's set an H axis. And that's going to be the title. If you're wondering where I'm getting this from, it's over in the Google Charts documentation. Let's call it count. Do we want the H-axis horizontal? Yeah. Because we're wanting it to be kind of a sideways bar chart. So the horizontal axis is going to be the count or cost. And let's give this title a text style. And that text style, let's do font size. We don't need to be too big. And let's make it bold. Okay, so that takes care of our H-axis. Now let's do our Y-axis. Or not our Y. That always gets me. Our V-axis, our vertical axis. And the vertical axis, we can just grab this and use this. It's not going to be count, or wow, that's horrible. It's not going to be count or cost. It's going to be category. And text style should still be the same. That's good. And then we'll do a legend. And that legend is going to be see, I'm missing some colons here. This legend is going to be, let's position it as none. I'll go ahead and type out the rest of these options so you're not having to look, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so I got the rest of these in here. So what I typed while I was away here was we have the bars. Now this bar shows the grouping width. You can set that at 75%. When you set it at 75%, this is how far that bar is. So if you did 100%, it would just take up the whole little column. We want it to be a little bit more narrow. Now this width and the height is, you may have to play with this depending on how you have your dashboard laid out. This is how far the chart actually takes up in its parent div. And then the chart area itself set to 75 and 80. And depending on, depending on how you have your chart set up inside your web app, your div, that row in the column, then you may need to adjust this depending on how it looks and if you're able to see it. We may have to, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, but we'll see. We'll see. Now the only thing that we have left to do is to draw the thing. So let's come down here, and what we're wanting to do is to draw the chart. So let's create another constant, just like we did last time, except let's just call this benefits chart, and we'll make this benefits chart equal to new Google visualization. And we are going to use a bar chart, which is the horizontal. And we are wanting to grab an element because that's where we want to populate it. And that element is going to be called benefits chart. And we simply want to take this variable and draw the chart using the formatted data and the benefits option. Now let's come down and make sure that we have this benefits chart div. And we do. You'll see that I did this deflex justify content center to put it at the center, but let's go see how our spacing does. Well, let's go see how our spacing does and if this thing works. Come back over to our page here and refresh it. Okay, so we have our salary thing. Now let's go over here to our benefits and nothing being rendered. Let's see what's going on. F12. Okay, uncaught syntax error, unexpected token at, okay, got a curly bracket somewhere. Okay, so let's go find out where this curly bracket is. We have a rogue curly brackets. Okay. Curly bracket. Ah, we do have a row curly bracket. It's right there. So this should be the benefits overview. And that should end it. Okay, good. So now let's try this again. Completely forgot about that curly bracket. Okay, so let's refresh it and see what we got. Loaded, and our benefits. Still nada. Let's see what we got. Did I not save it? Did not save it. All right, so let me come back here and save it and then try it again. Okay, refresh it. With that populate, okay, that's populated. Then we'll go over here to our benefits, and that should, okay, there we go. Populated. Now you'll see that the challenge with using Google Charts, I found out, is it's really fickety when we put it inside this. So let me try and refresh this into a normal view, because if that's the case, then we can change it and fix it. So let's see if it's the zoom that's messing up our side here. Okay, nope. So let's come back over here. Zoom back in here. Let's come back over here and actually take off this padding. I was thinking about maybe moving it over, but let's see how that works now. Nope, interesting. So let me try and change this, and I'll let you know what I did if this starts showing that. There we go. There we go. So what I did was I removed the padding and then set it to 1100 by 500, because that's the thing that we're going to need to adjust. And then what we'll do with our CSS is we'll make sure that this is available on all viewports. But now we have a chart. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this same piece here, the same code, and do the same for our vision and our dental. And then the next video, we'll go over how to combine those or whatnot. So I hope this was helpful and beneficial. If you would like me to put together something different, maybe a video on how to do it with, I think we talked about Looker Studio, I'll be more than happy to do that. And until next time, please take care.